Mark, I'm hoping you bought your calculator because my primary question for you is, does that math work?
I mean, it works if you want to blow a huge hole in the deficit. What we're hearing about is lots and lots and lots of tax cuts, some revenue from tariffs and cutting wasteful spending, but it's not going to close that gap.
Well, give us a sense of your take, the committee's take on both of these candidates, these campaigns' approaches here. Mark, they've filled in a couple of blanks since we've had you last on. Kamala Harris, for instance, yesterday wading into the waters of capital gains taxes when it comes to the highest earners here, those making $1 million or more. Let's listen to what she said about that during her visit to New Hampshire, and we'll have you respond. Listen.
If you earn $1 million a year or more, the tax rate on your long-term capital gains will be 28% under my plan, because we know when the government encourages investment, it leads to broad-based economic growth and it creates jobs, which makes our economy stronger.
We know she also wants a higher corporate tax rate than Donald Trump, Mark. When you step back, though, and look at the numbers, realizing we may not have full plans proposed here, which one does more damage to the deficit?
Well, as you said, we still don't have the full plans, especially from Vice President Harris. But what we are hearing is an awful lot of discussion about how they're going to cut taxes and increase spending, and only a minimal amount of discussion of the pay-fors. If I was judging today, my guess is both candidates are going to be in the red. Donald Trump may be more in the red, but again, very incomplete data.
Well, fair enough. Of course, that's not where the news ended from Donald Trump today. He also floated the idea of a federal audit task force led by Elon Musk. Aside from the selection of Elon Musk to lead that particular task force or committee, whatever you want to call it, Mark, what about the actual premise, the idea that they are going to fully look at the entire federal government and figure out where they can cut the waste? If you cut all the waste, what does that add up to?
Yeah, I like the idea of some kind of commission. We did the Grace Commission. That was one way to look at waste. I worked in the Simpson-Bowles Commission. But here's the thing. The three largest government programs are Social Security, Medicare, and Defense. So unless you define waste to include waste in those programs, and believe me, there's a tremendous amount of waste in healthcare, you're not going to get significant dollars.
We actually heard an interesting message, an open letter, if you will, to Elon Musk, Mark, from the group Taxpayers for Common Sense. They did this in a podcast, the Budget Watchdog All Federal podcast, and said, quote, to Elon Musk, "It's time to light the fires and kick the tires on a fiscal commission that will protect American taxpayers. But keeping Elon Musk, Donald Trump, and Congress on the correct trajectory toward fiscal success is truly rocket science." With a reference, I presume, to SpaceX. Mark, is Elon Musk capable of doing that?
I mean, I'm not going to weigh in on who should be the chairman of this committee, but I'd be glad if they take a serious look at waste and abuse. Again, there is fraud in government. It's not that large relative to the problem. But if we're willing to look at waste, at overpayments in Medicare, at places that states are sort of manipulating the federal government to get a bigger match, there is potentially hundreds of billions or even low trillions of dollars there. But it requires looking aggressively. You can't just look at, somebody that cheated to get extra food stamps. That's not going to get you too much money. Mm-hmm.
Well, and Mark, to the point you were just making, this notion that you can't get much of anywhere if you're not looking at the entitlements that no one wants to touch. Are either of these candidates being honest about whether or not Americans are going to be able to count on these programs far into the future?
So Social Security is 9 years from insolvency, 9 years away. And the candidates are saying they want to protect it. What does that mean? If you don't touch the program, there is a 21% across-the-board benefit cut scheduled into law. We did the math on this today. It would be $16,500 for a typical couple. Let me say that again. A typical couple requiring 9 years, they will face a $16,500 cut to their benefits if there aren't changes made to this program. And yet neither candidates are talking about how they actually want to save Social Security.
Well, and that's not going to happen, is it, Mark? Even if the candidates did want to tackle Social Security, you're not going there with this Congress, are you?
Well, I presumably it'd be the next Congress. But look, I think if there's presidential leadership and that president is willing to reach across the aisle, there's opportunity. That's what we saw in 1983, right? Reagan came out with a Social Security plan in 1981. He got destroyed. And then he came back in 83. He reached across the aisle to Tip O'Neill. They agreed to adjust the retirement age, to raise the payroll tax. They all did some things they didn't like. But as a result, they had a plan that made Social Security solvent for 50 years. We can do that again.
Well, as we consider not the next Congress, but this current Congress, Mark, they're coming back on Monday after a long summer recess, and they are very quickly going to be faced with a funding deadline of September 30th. We expect it'll be a forced vote on a CR of some kind, of some length. It doesn't really seem that that is going to be something that changes unless they're willing for a shutdown before the election. Where do you expect that it goes as we consider the Congress that is currently sitting, who, of course, is trying to get reelected?
Yeah, I mean, there may be some pomp and circumstance, but I expect the most likely situation is we will do a flat CR, meaning we're just going to continue the current level of funding, either into the lame duck or early into the next administration. And that's not solving the problem, but it is kicking the can. So at least we know who's going to win the election before we have to make any final decisions.